Marc Raimondi from MMAfighting.com outside T-Mobile Arena in the media tent, joined here by Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com and The Ringer. This is the UFC 235 post-fight show. We just saw Jon Jones defend his UFC light heavyweight title, the unanimous decision against Anthony Smith, and a little bit of a surprise, Kamaru Usman in the co-main event take the UFC welterweight title from Tyron Woodley, also by unanimous decision. Chuck, I want to start with the main event, Jon Jones versus Anthony Smith. Wasn't the most spectacular performance that we've seen from Jon Jones. Was not a finish like we have seen in the past with Jon Jones. What do you think of his performance overall, though?
So there's a lot of things to think about when you're watching this fight. You wonder which angle you're looking at it, because if you're listening to Anthony Smith coming in, you're expecting him to maybe disrupt that action a little bit, maybe get some offense going early, put Jon into awkward situations. It just never really materialized, and I felt like in that first round specifically, there was a pretty nice cautionary period where they were kind of feeling each other out, seeing what was going to happen. But once you saw Jon kind of establish his rhythm a little bit and get the space kind of lined up and kind of knew got his range, he was landing a lot of kicks, and you could just see that Anthony Smith wasn't right. He wasn't going to be able to get in there and exact, I think, what he was hoping to do. So it wasn't so much that I was disappointed in Jon Jones. I thought Jon looked great on whole. Probably what you'd expect if he figures out something like that. He doesn't want to go in there incautious himself. He looked very good. I just felt like if there was a disappointment, it might have been a little bit on the Smith side, because I thought maybe he would get in there and force Jon into some bad situations.
It's kind of interesting, Chuck, because I think people will say, well, Jon Jones should have finished Anthony Smith. He looked like he was toying with him at times. Yeah. And other people will say, well, Anthony Smith did not do enough in that fight to really get Jon into a fight. And that's actually one of the things that Jon Jones said at the press conference just a few minutes ago, is that it was really up to Anthony Smith to make this a fight, and he didn't do that. Right. Is there some validity to that?
I think so, to an extent. I mean, I think that Jon, we didn't really address it in the presser, but I feel like Jon probably was a little surprised, honestly, like that he was able to kind of like sit back and be Jon Jones, as Smith was saying. Just a weird fight. And truthfully, there almost was a finish in this fight. It just was an illegal one almost in the fourth round. And Jon actually is very lucky that Anthony Smith is that kind of fighter who was like, you know what, I'm still good to go. He could have very easily said, he took that knee. Was it a knee, or it was a kick and then a knee? Yeah. He took the knee, was the one that they stopped and gave the 2-point deduction. He could have easily said, I can't continue. And right now we have a whole different discussion. So Jon Jones with an assist from Anthony Smith on that, he was lucky that disqualification didn't happen.
I do want to ask you more about that, because that was a pretty strange occurrence, because it was one of those situations where Anthony Smith had one hand down, and Jones kneed him anyway. Now, in some states, as we know, that would have been perfectly legal, but in Nevada, because they have not passed the full new unified rules, you can it is still illegal when it's only one hand down. In other states like California and New York, you need to put two hands down. So in California, if Jones were fighting, that would have been a legal knee. Right. Here it's illegal. And I asked Jones about this, and he kind of put it on himself, but is that not confusing? And could you imagine what would have happened if Jon Jones would have lost by disqualification, which could, if Smith didn't continue, it would have been a DQ loss for Jon Jones, the second one of his career, all because of the confusion over what the knee rule is.
I really can't imagine that, because look how long it took us to get to just a normal Jon Jones fight where he's just facing a normal contender as the belt holder again. It took us forever to get here. It felt like a rightful return to something. He's back in the rotation. So to disrupt that and to have something like that happen where then a rematch is in order, I'm just glad. I was very relieved when I heard he was going to continue, because immediately you're flashing all of that complication. And sometimes, man, you do have to kind of feel for the UFC, because there's so much chaos in this game. And that was certainly one of those moments where you're like, something weird happens, the left field thing, and it would have derailed things for maybe the rest of this year. So I'm just happy we didn't end up in that situation. And honestly, man, Anthony Smith, he wasn't, he did not make an excuse of that at all. I think he was just mad at himself for not engaging more.
So now this all begs the question, and thankfully Smith did that, almost kind of took one for the sport in a sense. But it begs the question now. We've seen Jon Jones. He's returned. He has these 2 wins now against Alexander Gustafsson, Anthony Smith. What is next for Jon Jones? Because we saw him against Smith, and it wasn't the most riveting performance, and you want to see someone like that get challenged. What do you do with him next? Is it heavyweight? Yeah. Is it the Thiago Santos contender? What do you do?
Man, they were talking about that a lot in this press conference. There was variations. Dana White thought he might be best suited for a guy like Thiago Santos, who we know is a heavy hitter. I don't know, man. I feel like if where John Jones is, it's okay to have the division coming at him again. But at the same time, because there's not clear-cut contenders, don't you kind of want to see him in a fight where it's like just a big money fight where he's fighting one of these guys? Not a title, maybe not going to get for the title right away at heavyweight, but maybe fighting a guy like Stipe Miocic in the meantime, or they mentioned Brock Lesnar and guys like that. I kind of want to see that because I feel like that's what that would cast doubt over the situation. I feel like that's what John Jones needs more than anything. But to be honest, man, since he's back in the rotation, if they decide to put Santos against him, I'd be totally okay with that. After that fight, though, if he walks through him, then I think you got to really look at, what would be more exciting for him.
I agree, and it's kind of funny because there are some fighters in situations where you don't want them to chase the money fights or the super fights, and there's a lot of that going on right now in the UFC. But someone like Jones, we want to see him in heavyweight. Right. It's just kind of the natural, I guess, inclination.
He's been flirting with it for so long,
He has. Anyway, let's get to the big title change in the co-main event. Kamaru Usman with the performance of his career, not only beating Tyron Woodley, completely dominating him. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming. He really controlled him in every facet of the game, won every round, won at least one round 10-8, if not multiple rounds 10-8. What is your take on this really magnificent performance put on by Usman?
I feel like we all slept on him a little bit. I mean, I think everybody I talked to was like, hey, he's a live dog. I don't think people would have been shocked if he won the fight, but to dominate it from horn to horn for 25 minutes and really just dictate the whole fight where it took place. Even in a couple of the exchanges, I thought he got the better of Woodley on those rare occasions where they broke out a little bit. I don't know what to say, man. I wouldn't have guessed in a million years that he would dominate the fight like that, where he's just suffocating Woodley, closing in, using the clinch, putting him against the fence, just making it a grimy affair where I felt like Woodley I felt like he came off his moorings early in that fight and he just never knew how to recover. I felt like he just kind of kept his guns holstered because it was just one of those big fight moments where he just didn't know what to do. But hats off to Usman, man, because that was the performance of his career. He didn't get the finish. Like I thought, like if he was going to win, maybe that would be the way to get him over. But I think he was so dominant. And they had the next challenger obviously right there in the front row.
And we will get to our friend Colby in a minute.
But just given all those factors, I feel like he did enough to kind of to set up his next fight and make him more formidable in that fight.
Don't want to take anything away, of course, from Kamaru Usman, but did you get the feeling that Usman was beating the best possible version of Tyron Woodley? Because it didn't seem like even Woodley felt like that himself afterward.
No, how weird that both guys in our main event and our co-main were basically saying the same thing, which was that they didn't, for whatever reason, they just didn't look like themselves or perform like they said they were going to. Woodley we've seen Woodley in bad performances, but I've just never seen him where you didn't see him have a moment in a fight. I just felt like he never even had a moment in this fight, and that was surprising, man. And like they say in fighting, your bad day sticks out a lot more than like a guy like us. We have a bad day, we write something that isn't as good as something else. But these guys, it's in front of everybody, and you lose a belt like that, he may never get that chance again. You never know. You feel for him if he was just having an off day or whatever happened, if he was just having a mental block, whatever it was. But I did not feel like he was himself. No.
It's really interesting because you think about Woodley and he's had these bad days, and he was a long-term champion in the welterweight division. It really makes you respect the John Joneses of the world and the Anderson Silvas of the world and the George St. Pierres of the world, because these long runs, the Demetrius Johnsons, they never really had a bad night. Right. And it kind of magnifies it again. Even looking at someone like John Jones, who maybe wasn't at his best tonight against Anthony Smith, he still got the job done with relative ease for him. Yep. Anyway, you mentioned Kamaru Usman comes out of the cage after beating Woodley. Pretty much the first person that he goes over to is Colby Covington, who is there with his Make America Great Again hat with the fake belt on his shoulder. Is that the fight to make? Is it obvious that is the next fight, Usman versus Covington?
I think so, because he was basically next anyway. So Usman kind of stepped in front of him. Okay, perfect. Now you got this thing solved. It's a little bit more simplistic now, I think, because there's not an automatic rematch in the situation where you're dominated like this. So you have the guy right there. They actually don't like each other. We heard Usman up on the stage saying, is the only time he cusses in the whole press conference is when he's talking about Colby Covington and how badly he just wants to bring bodily harm to him. Hey, I'm sold. And I think that honestly, the fact that Colby Covington has, I don't know how long his shtick is going to pay off. So I'm like, as long as he's out here and he's trumpeting it, and Dana White was behind it, and he was the interim champ. He has that case. This might be the high water mark of his career. So let him have it.
Trumpeting or trumping?
I don't know.
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Anyway,
you're the one guy who can out-pun me any day of the week. So all right.
I'm not sure about that, but we will move on from there. One last thing about the co-main event: Woodley loses the fight. Where does he go from here? Because I know that he said in the press conference he wants to find that path back to the title, but what does that path look like?
To be honest, man, I don't know, because he's not going to get a title. The only thing that can happen now is if Covington goes in and wins against Guzman, and then that reopens up the door for him to get in there. But he's going to have to take a fight in between. Then there's that extra complication now with his boy Ben Askren actually having won. I'm sure we're going to talk about this. But, now it's like, does he have first right of refusal to get back to that belt? Or how do they work that out? Like, because he's also flirted with the idea of going up to middleweight. I think ultimately what he should do is take another fight when he's ready at welterweight. If he's able to win that, we'll see where he's at. If he's, if it makes sense for him to get another title shot, he takes it, obviously. But if not, I think he might consider going to middleweight at that point.
Let's talk about that Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler fight, because Askren was kind of the man of the hour all week, and we're left talking a lot about him again after this fight. So to set the scene, Robbie Lawler comes out and pretty much bludgeons Ben Askren from the beginning of the fight, beats him up, slams him on his head, is very, very close to finishing him. Some would even say that it should have been stopped at one point. Askren rallies, gets Lawler in a bulldog choke, and puts the squeeze on, and it appears, at least for a very slight moment, that Lawler went out. Herb Dean jumps in, kind of touches Lawler's hand. It looks like he was still okay, but Herb Dean calls off the fight. Submission for Ben Askren. Now, there is controversy here.
Of course there is.
Chuck, was Robbie Lawler actually out? Because he's saying no, Askren is saying yes. Bob Bennett, the executive director of the Nevada Athletic Commission, seems to think that he was clearly out, and he has no problem with what referee Herb Dean did. But what is going on here?
So that's not even the question, really. It's like, was he out or was he not? In the end, you're looking at what was the split second, what did it look like? What was the indication there? From my angle, and I think from a lot of people I was around, it looked like he just went limp. And we were all like, oh, he's out. It's only when Herb Dean jumps in there that you see him bounce right back, and you think, oh my gosh, no, he wasn't out. He wasn't even close to out, because it was instantaneous the way he popped. It was like one of those little music boxes or something. It was like he popped up so quickly that you're like, there was no way he was out. The only thing I can say is, in that split moment, you could see his arm go limp. It was Herb Dean at that moment clearly was saying something to him. And as he's getting in, and this is where his momentum just kind of carried him in there, and as he's kind of like, sorry, you could see that's when he's reacting with his thumbs up and all this stuff. Just one of those situations where, honestly, Herb Dean is he's looking out for the fighter there.
Yeah.
I can't blame him, really. I know a lot of people want to, pounce on him for that, but it's a lot worse if he really is out and he lets that chokehold go on for a long time. The other thing I will say is there was, a minute and a half-ish, a minute and 40 seconds, something like that left. You have to then think, okay, how long would that hold have stayed there? Like, I think Askren's a pretty good guy that way. I think he might have held that choke for a lot longer. I mean, so you never know. But I would say that in the end, it's a controversial thing because it sucks for Robbie Lawler, who handled it very well up here, accepted it, and just kind of even gave kudos to Herb Dean. But it's just one of those unfortunate things, man, where they're erring to the side of caution, and it's really hard to fault that in the end.
I find it difficult to when it comes to Robbie Lawler, and he said he wasn't going to complain, he's not going to file any kind of appeal because that's Robbie Lawler. If there's anyone who has the credibility when they say, hey, guys, I wasn't out, I was just waiting for him to gas out his arms, it's Robbie Lawler, is it not? I mean, if Lawler says something, you're pretty much going to believe him. He's a pretty straight shooter.
100%. And the only reason it even sticks, I mean, Robbie Lawler being who he is, but the only reason it really sticks out is because of the way he handled himself in the first moments of that fight, right? You're watching a fight that he was literally dominating and this close to finishing himself. Suddenly he's in another situation where he doesn't get the equal chance. It's just one of those perfect storms, man. I kind of hope they play it back just because of that. Just because I felt like it was a little unresolved in that sense.
So Dana White and the UFC seem to want to run that back, and I know Robbie Lawler wants to run that back.
Right.
Ben Askren has other ideas. He wants to fight the winner of the Darren Till versus Jorge Masvidal fight at UFC London coming up in a few weeks. Is the rematch the one to do? Does Askren have as a point? Does he have a leg to stand on as far as not getting the fight that the UFC wants?
Well, Askren's going to be very tough to to work with in this situation. Obviously, you were talking to Dana White about their rivalry, and unfortunately, yes, here it is. And we'll see kind of how it plays out. But ultimately, man, what would you rather see in the end? I think because of the way this fight ended, the Lawler fight, and Lawler, like I said, was this close to finishing it. So which one's going to be more compelling, to run that fight back or to have him face, Darren Till to me and Askren is a one-sided fight. I just think that Askren presents too many problems for Till. We've already kind of seen a similar version of that with Woodley. So I'm like, I don't really care about that as much, but if it was Masvidal, maybe it gets a little more intriguing. To me, though, that if that's the fight to make, unless they go another route, a whole different route, or something, he steps in for one of these guys or something like that. But ultimately, the only fight I can think of right now would be the Lawler one.
To put a quick cap on this fight, is it a situation where almost both of them had their stock go up? Because we didn't know what kind of Lawler we were going to see coming back from knee surgery. He's 36 years old, and we had no idea what to expect from Askren against this level of competition. So was it almost a positive in a way for both of them?
I think it was, ultimately, because people feel for Robbie Lawler and just the way he looked. And we've talked about this, too. The more quiet he is in a fight lead-up, the more I feel like he shows up like that. He just shows up like ready to kill somebody. So I thought he looked fine, and the fact that he popped right back up, he loses nothing. I think he loses nothing. It just he looks like a victim, really, of a bad circumstance. And the one thing we have not seen from Ben Askren is his ability to rebound. And I was wondering, as he was doing that, and we saw him recover just enough. I was like, what is it? Where does he go from there? Like, how does he get back into get his legs behind him again and go for the takedowns and all that? Well, we saw him do that. So I felt like he showed something that we hadn't seen from him, where he's in a really bad situation. He was able to respond. So both guys came out of it looking pretty good, I thought.
Sure, the opener of the main card saw Pedro Munoz knock out Cody Garbrandt in what turned very quickly into just a wild, crazy brawl at the end of the first round. Chuck, there's a couple things about this fight, and I don't want to lose sight of what Munoz did, but Garbrandt has been a guy for a number of years that the UFC has been targeting. They've kind of put the rocket ship on his back. They've given him sponsorships, and this is 3 losses in a row, 3 knockout losses in a row. What is going on with Cody Garbrandt?
It's one of those situations. I kind of compared on Twitter. I compared it to watching a friend lose all his money at a roulette table, because you just see him doing something, and you're like, yeah. Because Dan White described it right, I thought, when he said he got clipped and you just saw him go into war mode. I thought that I saw it. You just see him, his eyes go black, and all of a sudden he's just swinging, and you see there's a couple of punches that just about caught him. And you're like, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time. And then he does get caught.
Was gonna go down.
I know. Somebody was going to go down. I thought what he was doing earlier was perfect. He was feeling it out. He was getting the rhythm going. Like, you could see him getting his space. You could see him doing his little, his theatrics a little bit. The stuff that I was wondering if he would do, he was doing all that perfectly. I think he just gets overzealous, man. I think he wants to just get it all back as quickly as he can. And unfortunately, it just keeps going against him. So I felt bad for him, especially right when he went down. You're just like, here we go again. And you know how much each one of these losses hurts him, and especially where he was to where he will be now. And it's just, you feel for a guy like that. That's
Also on the main card, Weili Zhang defeated Tecia Torres. Any thoughts on Weili Zhang? Kind of a little bit of a coming out party against one of the better fighters historically in the strawweight division.
Yeah, I thought she looked pretty good, actually, and there was a couple of times where Tecia Torres had just really muscled her into bad positions and stuff, and you're like, this might be something bad. She would scramble out of it. I just, you like to see that. I really do. I like to see, there's been a lot of Asian fighters that have come over to America and they don't fight as well for whatever reason. But if they're fighting in Japan or China or wherever, they perform better. I'm always happy to see that, because I remember Yushin Okami back in the day was a guy that was one of the only guys who would come over to America and fight equally. Like, he always seemed like he rose to the occasion over here. So I like to see that. I think the North American audience likes to see that, and she showcased really well. And I mean, honestly, man, probably skyrockets her a little bit, because it was such a more visible fight than all of her other ones so far.
Yeah, and probably working at the UFC Performance Institute in Las Vegas for the past few weeks has certainly helped. Chuck, last thing I want to ask you, was there anything else on the UFC 235 prelim card that you wanted to talk about for a little bit, wanted to kind of highlight?
You just want me to talk about Johnnie Walker, don't you?
I would have done the whole show on Johnnie Walker if y'all had let me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, that guy right there, and I said this before. We were talking before this whole thing. I said he seems like a guy who, especially this quick turnaround, just his the effortless kind of ease he seems to handle the situation, like a pressure cooker situation. He just steps in against a guy with a lot more experience, and he does that to him, a flying knee that's just perfectly timed. I mean, just like, you know, like an NBA player just jumping. I was like, his leap was amazing. And to land it and put him away that quickly again, and then to add to the weird, his mysticism by like injuring himself doing I mean, all this stuff, I'm like, it blows you away. So different. The dude is chiseled. He's very intense looking. I just feel like he's a star in the making. I feel like this really kind of solidified him. I felt like, too, you know, you listen to Dana and you listen to some of the periphery of the media and all that, and I feel like he's already there. So I feel like his next fight will be a big fight for him, you know.
3 fights in the UFC, 3 first-round knockouts, all in violent fashion. The only time he's been injured, by doing the worm post-fight at UFC 235. It was that
sums up the event, right?
It's that kind of weird night here in Las Vegas, and we're going to leave it here for now. Stay tuned to MMAfighting.com for all of your post-fight UFC 235 coverage. For Chuck, I'm Mark. Thanks for hanging out with us this week.